Pure and Simple by Upasika Nanayon. Translated from the Thai by Thanissaro Bhikkhu. In June 1973, the Khao Sun Long community celebrated Upasika Khi's 72nd birthday, an important milestone in a culture that calculates years in 12-year cycles, by printing a collection of excerpts from her Dhamma talks. The following selections are drawn from that collection. The first requirement when you come to practice is that you need to be the sort of person who loves the truth, and you need to possess endurance to do what's true. Only then will your practice get anywhere. Otherwise it all turns into failure, and you go back to being a slave to your defilements and cravings, just as before. When you don't contemplate yourself, how much suffering do you cause for yourself? And how much do you cause for others? These are the things we should contemplate as much as we can. If we don't, we keep trying to get. We don't try to let go, to put things aside, to make any sacrifices at all. We just keep trying to get, for the more we get, the more we want. If you're greedy and stingy, then even if you have loads of money, the Buddha says you're poor, poor in noble treasures, poor in the treasures of the mind. Even if you have lots of external wealth, when you die it all goes to other people. It turns into common property, but you yourself are left poor in virtue, poor in the Dhamma. The mind without its own home, a mind without the Dhamma as its home, has to live with the defilements. This defilement arises and the mind goes running after it. As soon as it disappears, that one arises over there and the mind goes running after that. Because the mind has no dwelling of its own, it has to keep running wild all over the place. Practicing to put an end to defilement and suffering is a high level of practice. So you first have to clear the ground and put it in good order. Don't think that you can practice without any preparation. If you live for your appetites, all you can think of is getting things for the sake of your appetites. If you don't develop a sense of contentment, or a sense of shame on the beginning level, it'll be hard to practice the higher levels. The important part of the practice lies in contemplating. If you don't contemplate, discernment won't arise. The Buddha taught us to contemplate and test things to the point where we can clearly know for ourselves. Only then will we have a proper refuge. He never taught us to take refuge in things we ourselves can't see or do. If you truly want to gain release from suffering, you have to practice truly. You have to make a true effort. You have to let go, starting with outward things and working inward. You have to free yourself from the delusion that falls for delicious allures of every kind. The important point in letting go is to see the drawbacks of what you're letting go. Only then can you let go once and for all. If you don't see its drawbacks, you'll still be attached and will miss having it around. If you're going to let go of anything, you first have to see its drawbacks. If you just tell yourself to let go, the mind won't easily obey. You really have to see the drawbacks of the thing you're holding on to, and then the mind will let go of its own accord. It's like grabbing hold of fire. When you feel the heat, you let go of your own accord, and will never dare grasp it again. It's hard to see the drawbacks of sensual passion, but even harder to see the drawbacks of more subtle things, like your sense of self. On the beginning level of the practice, you have to learn how to control yourself in the area of your words and deeds. In other words, on the level of virtue, so that you can keep your words and deeds at normalcy, calm and restrained. In this way, the mind won't follow the power of the crude defilements. When violent urges arise, you stop them first with your powers of endurance. After you've been able to endure for a while, your insight will gain the strength it needs to develop a sense of right and wrong. And in this way, you'll see the worth of endurance, that it is really a good thing. When you do good, let it be good in line with nature. Don't latch onto the thought that you're good. If you get attached to the idea that you're good, it will give rise to lots of other attachments. When a mind without pride or conceit gets a scolding, it shrinks back like a cow hit by a stick. Your sense of self will disappear right before your eyes. A good cow, even if it sees only the shadow of the whip or the stick, stays still and composed, ready to do quickly what it's told. A meditator who can reduce her pride and conceit is sure to make progress, and will have nothing heavy to weigh down her mind. The mind will be still and empty, free from any attachment to me or mine. This is how the mind grows empty. If you're the sort of person who's open and honest, you'll find your window for disbanding suffering and defilement right where you're honest with yourself, right where you come to your senses. You don't have to go explaining high-level Dhamma to anyone. All you need is the ordinary level of being honest with yourself about the sufferings and drawbacks of your own actions, so that you can put a stop to them, so that you develop a sense of wariness, a sense of shame. That's much better than talking about high-level Dhamma, but then being heedless, complacent, and shameless. When you look back to the past, you see that it's all an affair of your own heedlessness. Even though you knew the Buddha's teachings and were able to explain them correctly, still the heart and mind were in a state of heedlessness. Actually, when people know a lot of Dhamma and can show off a lot of their knowledge, they can be more heedless than people who know only a little. Those who've never read Dhamma books tend to be more heedful, for they're more modest and know that they need to read their own minds all the time. Those who've read a lot of books or heard a lot of talks tend to get complacent, and in this way they become heedless and disrespectful of the Dhamma. We have to figure out how to use our own mindfulness and discernment to look inwardly at all times, for no one else can know these things or see these things for us. We have to know for ourselves. When things are weak and watery, they flow away. When they're solid, they don't flow. When the mind is weak and devoid of strength, it's always ready to flow away like water. But when the mind is endowed with mindfulness and discernment, when it's solid and true in its effort, it can withstand the flow of the defilements. When you first start meditating, it's like catching a monkey and tying it to a leash. When it's first tied down, it'll struggle with all its might to get away. In the same way, when the mind is first tied down to its meditation object, it doesn't like it. It'll struggle more than it normally would, which makes us feel weak and discouraged. So in this first stage, we simply have to use our endurance to resist the mind's tendency to stray off in search of other objects. Over time, it will gradually grow tame. You want the mind to be quiet, but it won't be quiet. So what do you have to do? What do you have to focus on? What do you have to know so that you can see how the arising and passing away of fabrication occur? Try to look carefully, and you're sure to know for yourself. For it's not anything hidden or mysterious. It's something whose basic principles you can catch sight of yourself. What can we do so that the mind doesn't get distracted with its preoccupations or its nonsensical mental fabrications? We have to give the mind something to focus its awareness on. For if its awareness isn't focused on one thing, it wanders around to know other things, other matters, aside from itself. This is why there's the practice of focusing our awareness on the body, or on the breath, making the breath the post to which we tie our monkey, the mind. In other words, we use mindfulness to keep the mind focused on the breath. This is the first step in the practice. Training the mind to stay focused on the breath is something we have to do continuously, with each in and out breath, in every posture, sitting, standing, walking, lying down. No matter what you're doing, stay focused on the breath. If you want, you can simply stay focused on nothing more than the sensation of the breath, without determining whether it's long or short. Keep breathing normally. Don't force the breath or hold the breath or sit with your body too tense. Sit straight and face comfortably straight ahead. If you're going to turn to the left, make sure to be focused on the breath as you turn. If you turn to the right, stay focused on the breath as you turn. Whatever posture you use is up to you, but stay focused on the breath continuously. If your attention lapses, bring it back to knowing the breath again. Whatever you're doing at any time, watch the breath with every in and out breath, and you'll be developing mindfulness and alertness, full body self-awareness. At the same time, you're being aware of the breath. When you walk, you don't have to focus on the steps of the feet. Focus on the breath and let the feet do the stepping on their own. Let each part of the body perform its function on its own. All you'll have to do is stay focused on the breath, and you'll have full body awareness. Whether the eye is looking at sights or the ear is listening to sounds, stay focused on the breath. When you look at a sight, make sure that knowing the breath underlies the looking. When you listen to a sound, make sure that knowing the breath underlies the listening. The breath is a means for making the mind quiet, so you first have to train yourself with it. Don't be in a hurry to get higher results. Train the mind to stay under the control of mindfulness continuously for days on end, to the point where the mind can't let its attention lapse. It will come to stay more and more with the breath, focused on knowing the breath continuously, and then other things will stop on their own. Thinking stops, speaking stops. Whatever tasks you have to do, you can still do them while at the same time keeping track of the breath each and every moment. If there are any lapses, you come back to knowing the breath again. There's nothing else you have to think about. Be aware of the breath at the same time you're aware of the normalcy of the mind. When the mind can maintain its stance in normalcy, you can observe the breath and see that it's at normalcy too. When their normalcy is in balance, you focus down on knowing that the breath is simply a natural phenomenon, the wind property. The body as a whole is composed of the 4 properties: earth, water, fire, and wind. So here we're focused on the wind property. The wind property is a natural phenomenon, not us or ours. The mind is then at normalcy, not thinking or fabricating anything to stir things up. It, too, is a natural phenomenon, pure and simple. If it's not fabricated into anything else, if it's not burned by defilements, it can stay still and at normalcy. When you stay focused on the breath in every posture, it's a means of blocking the mind from traipsing around with its thoughts and labels. You have to be intent on training the mind to stay with the breath with every posture. That's how you'll come to know what the mind is like when it's had mindfulness of breathing as its dwelling place. Focusing on the breath helps the mind grow quiet more than any other method, and it's not at all tiring. Simply breathe comfortably. If you let the breath come in and out strongly, it helps the breath energy and blood flow throughout the body. If you breathe deeply so that the stomach muscles relax, it helps to prevent constipation. When you train with the breath, it exercises both the body and the mind, and in this way everything calms down in a natural way more easily than if we try to calm things down with force or threats. No matter how much you threaten the mind, it won't surrender. It'll run all over the place. So instead, we train it to fall in line with nature. For after all, the breath is an aspect of nature. Whether you're aware of it or not, the breath breathes in line with its nature. Only when we focus on it are we aware of it. The body is also an aspect of nature. The mind is an aspect of nature. When they're trained in an appropriate way, there aren't a lot of problems that you have to solve. The flow of blood and breath energy in the body improves the state of your nerves. If you train your mindfulness and alertness to be aware of the whole body at the same time you're aware of the breath will flow effortlessly. If you sit for long periods of time, this practice will help keep the blood and breath energy flowing naturally. You don't have to fight the breath or hold it in. When you place your feet and hands in the meditation posture, don't tense them up. If you relax them so that the blood and breath energy flow easily, it'll be very helpful. Focusing on mindfulness of the breath is appropriate in every way. Appropriate for the body, appropriate for the mind. Before his awakening, when he was still a bodhisattva, the Buddha used mindfulness of breathing more than any other practice as the dwelling place for his mind. So when you practice it, you too will have mindfulness of breathing as the dwelling place for your mind. That way the mind won't wander around fabricating thoughts and getting embroiled. You have to get it to settle down and be still. As soon as anything springs up, focus on the breath. If you try to focus directly on the mind right from the start, it might be too difficult to manage if you're not familiar with it. If you want to focus directly on the mind, that's fine too, but you have to be aware of it with every in and out breath. Make your awareness continuous for long periods of time. Work at this in every posture and see what results arise. In the beginning, you have to put together the causes. In other words, you have to make an effort to look and know correctly. As for the letting go, that comes afterwards. The Buddha compared the training of the mind to holding a bird in your hand. The mind is like a tiny bird, and the question is how to hold the bird so that it doesn't fly away. If you hold it too tightly, it will die in your hand. If you hold it too loosely, the tiny bird will slip out through your fingers. So how are you going to hold it so that it doesn't die and doesn't get away? The same holds true with our training of the mind in a way that's not too tense and not too lax, but always just right. There are many things you have to know in training the mind, and you have to look after them correctly. On the physical side, you have to change postures in a way that's balanced and just right so that the mind can stay at normalcy, so that it can stay at a natural level of stillness and emptiness continuously. Physical exercise is also necessary. Even yogis who practice high levels of concentration have to exercise the body by stretching and bending it in various postures. We don't have to go to extremes like them, but we can exercise enough so that the mind can maintain its stillness naturally in a way that allows it to contemplate physical and mental phenomena, to see them as inconstant, stressful, and not self. If you force the mind too much, it dies just like the bird held too tightly. In other words, it grows deadened, insensitive, and will simply stay frozen in stillness without contemplating to see what inconstancy, stress, and not selfness are like. Our practice is to make the mind still enough so that it can contemplate inconstancy, stress, and not selfness. This is the point for which we train and contemplate, and that makes it easy to train. As for changing postures or working and getting exercise, we do these things with an empty mind. When you're practicing in total seclusion, you should get some physical exercise. If you simply sit and lie down, the flow of blood and breath energy in the body will get abnormal. The fourth tetrad in the instructions for keeping the breath in mind begins with keeping track of inconstancy with every in and out breath. The main obstacle that makes us unable to maintain this kind of awareness for long or for continuous periods of time is the fact that we don't maintain our awareness with every in and out breath. When things grow empty, we just let the mind grow quiet, without focusing, without contemplating. So everything drifts or grows blurry. Or some sort of fabrication arises easily so that we can't focus on the empty mind. So when any crude fabrication arises, you have to block it by focusing on the breath. Use the breath to snuff it out. Whether the fabrication is a tiny or a strong sensation, catch hold of the breath as your first step in protecting yourself. The more often you do this, the more it turns into a normal habit, and the more useful it will be. Simply staying with the breath can help prevent unskillful thinking. In other words, it can keep the mind from fabricating unskillful thoughts. That way, craving for sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations can't take shape. Whatever you're aware of, quickly focus on the breath, and whatever it is, it will simply stop and disband. When the mind is very refined and very still, if you don't maintain your focus, your stillness can blur or grow distracted. So you have to keep your mindfulness in focus. Breathe deeply and heavily as a way of waking the mind up. Don't let it grow quiet in an unfocused way. You have to focus on seeing the condition of emptiness within the mind that's a primal part of its nature. If you can do this, there's not much else to the practice. Simply keep the mind under the control of mindfulness and the breath. In other words, focus on watching it, knowing it. Even if there's some thinking that helps in your knowing, keep it short. Don't let it grow long. Whatever the reflection or the contemplation, keep it short. Don't let it grow long. If it's long, it will turn into distraction. Use the breath as a means of cutting it off. When your thinking starts getting long, make it stop. Keep it as short as possible. Make it stop as short as possible. Keep your still self-awareness as clear and bright as possible, seeing that it doesn't have any self. The mind that maintains itself in a state of normalcy is like a white cloth or a white sheet of paper. You have to keep focused on keeping watch over it to see when there's any sensory contact, how the mind wavers in reaction, how it labels things as good or bad or self. This is something you have to learn how to observe on a refined level.